In life, we try to avoid trials. We try to avoid things that can cause hardship, that can cause difficulties. But in James chapter 1 verse 2 it says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." When we read this verse, it doesn't make sense. Why should I be joyful when trials come into my life? Why should I be joyful when difficulties come? But from God's point of view, the trials is what refines us in life. God continually refines us. Life continually refines us. That's why in verse 2 it says that we should count it all joy when we fall into various trials. Because the trials refine us and makes us stronger. It's like gold being refined in fire. Gold, when it's in fire, the fire removes the impurities from the gold. Likewise, the trials remove the impurities from our life. It removes the immature part of us and allows us to become more mature. It allows us to be better. It allows us to be stronger. It allows us to be more refined. That's why in James chapter 1 it says in verse 3 that the testing of your faith produces patience. In verse 4 it says, "But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." So what does that mean? It says that we are lacking nothing, right? There's nothing in life that we are lacking. There's nothing internally that we are lacking. And so the way we reach that state of lacking nothing in our life is through the refinement of our faith and the refinement of our patience. That's why it says that the testing of your faith produces patience. So the trials in life, what they do is they test our faith and they produce patience. But then verse 4 says that we have to let patience have its perfect work. So patience has a certain work in our life. But what is patience? Patience is the ability to wait for something to come into your life. If you guys are being blessed by this video so far, subscribe to this channel to stay up to date when I post more videos like this. So if you're waiting for a job, you're waiting for a financial blessing, you're waiting for an increase in your ministry, you're waiting for a certain blessing to come into your life, we need to have patience. We need to have the ability to wait for that blessing to come into our life. And as we are having that patience, God is refining us, God is maturing us, and God is making us better in life. So when we look at our life, when we look at the various trials in our lives, we should not look at the difficulties. We should not be discouraged. We should not be dismayed, but rather we should be joyful when those things happen. And we should be joyful when trials come into our life, because we know that God is refining us. And so likewise, when we think about our faith, we need to have a faith that's able to endure the test of time. We need to have a faith that's able to endure the testing. We need to have a faith that's able to endure the fire that comes in our life. We shouldn't have a faith that's only there in the beginning, but then fades away. No, we should have a faith that lasts till the end, that's able to endure the test of time. What makes someone successful in life? If you see online, we see many successful people. We see many rich people, many successful people, but what is it that allows them to be successful? If you look at any successful person in life, it's because they had a faith that their life can be better than their current situation. They had a faith that they can make more money, or that they can have more success, or they can have a better life. That faith is what allows them to strive for that life, to strive for that better life. So the faith is what allows them to strive beyond in life. For example, if someone believes that they can never become rich in life, or that they can never have a better life, they will never strive to have a better life. They'll be complacent and they'll stay in the same place. But the reason why successful people were able to reach that in life is because they had a faith that they can achieve that life that they're desiring for. So faith is a prerequisite in order for us to be successful in any endeavor of our life. You need to have faith that your life can be better than it currently is. So when we talk about success, we have to have faith that we can reach that outcome. And so if internally we don't have the faith that we can reach that outcome, then we will never do anything about it. So faith is crucial. So that's what the Bible says, that we should walk by faith and not by sight. And so likewise, in our life, faith is crucial. Faith is what allows us to endure the testing. Faith is what allows us to endure the fire. So that means then that the most foundational thing is faith. But the problem is that for a lot of people, their faith is only starting strong in the beginning. For example, many people, when they come to God, they have an initial strong faith that God can change their life. That they may have an initial faith that God can deliver them from their problems, that God can deliver them from their addictions, that God can deliver them from their circumstances. So in the beginning, they may have a strong faith that their life could change. So they have an initial fire for God. They have an initial passion for God. They have an initial drive to be holy, to be righteous, but over time, that faith slowly fizzles out. Over time, that faith slowly dies. And so, what makes someone successful in their walk with God is not that they have the initial faith, but that they're able to keep faith until the end. Because anyone can have initial faith that yes, my life can change, that yes, God can do it. But very few people can still have that same faith even after a year, or even after 2 years, or even 5 years, or even 10 years. So we see then that success in life is not determined by how strong your faith is in the beginning, but rather it is determined by how strong your faith is still after many years. That is why in James chapter 1 it says that the trying of your faith produces patience. So the trial is not necessarily trying to test how strong your faith is in the beginning, it is testing whether your faith is still there at the end. That's why it says it right there, that the trying of your faith produces patience. So what does patience do? Patience allows you to keep faith even when you don't see any change in your circumstance. Patience allows you to keep faith even when the outside circumstances are not changing. For example, someone might be praying for a long time for their situation to change. They may be praying for a job. They may be praying for finances. They may be praying for their family. They may be praying for many things. And when you start praying, you have faith that your life can change. You have faith that your situation can change. But after what? After 1 month, after 2 months, after 6 months, after 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you still might not see a change in your situation. So it's very easy for us as humans to lose faith. It's very easy for us as humans to lose the belief that God can change our lives. That's where patience is required. Patience allows us to keep faith even when the outside circumstances are not changing. Patience allows us to keep faith even when things are not going our way. Patience allows us to keep faith even when we don't see the immediate results. And so in James chapter 1 verse 3, we see that the testing of your faith produces patience. And patience, in verse 4, we see that, but we let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. That means that if we let patience have its perfect work, if we let patience have its freedom to do what it needs to do, then we will become perfect and complete, lacking nothing in our lives. So it's not just that we have faith, but we also need to have the patience. We need to have the patience to keep the faith, even when we don't see the results. We need to have patience and to keep faith even when the circumstances are not changing. The reason why many people do not reach the life that they desire is because somewhere along the journey they lose patience. Somewhere along the journey they lose faith, become discouraged and give up. And so they never see the outcome, they never see the result, and they never see the blessing that they were praying for. So that means then one of the most crucial qualities to have in life is the ability to be patient. To endure through trials, to endure through difficulties, to endure through the fire, and yet still keep your faith. So patience is not just the ability to wait. It is the ability to wait while still having faith. It is the ability to keep on believing even when things are not changing. When everything around you seems like it's going against you. When people around you are telling you that it is not possible. That is what patience is. Patience is the ability to keep faith for a very long time. And so patience is crucial in our life. So when we talk about success, when we talk about reaching the life that God has called us to, it is not enough for us to have the initial faith. It is crucial for us to keep the faith until the end. So that means then that every day we should be continually renewing our faith. Every day we should be continually reminding ourselves of the promises of God. Because if we don't remind ourselves of the vision, if we don't remind ourselves of the promises, we will slowly lose the faith. We will slowly lose the belief that our life will change. And once we lose that belief, we will never reach the life that God has called us to live. Think about like a person going to the gym. When someone first goes to the gym, the first few weeks they are very excited. For the first few weeks they're very motivated. They have a very strong drive to change their body. But after 3 or 4 weeks, once the initial excitement wears off, that's when the real test begins. The real test is not whether they can be excited for 3 weeks. The real test is that can they continue to go to the gym even when they don't feel like it? Can they continue to go to the gym even when they feel tired? Even when they are not seeing immediate results? That is what patience is. Patience is the ability to continue even when you don't feel like it. Even when you are not seeing immediate results. Even when it is difficult. So likewise, in our spiritual life, we need to have patience. We need to have the ability to continue to pray even when we don't see results. We need the ability to continually seek God even when we don't feel His presence. That's what patience is. Patience is the ability to continually do the right thing even when it is difficult. So we need to ask ourselves, not just do I have faith right now, but will I still have faith 5 years from now? Will I still have faith 10 years from now? Will I still have faith 20 years from now? That's what patience produces in our life. Patience produces an enduring faith. A faith that can endure the test of time. A faith that can endure the trials. And so when we look at our life, we need to ask ourselves, do I have this kind of patience? If not, then we need to ask God to develop this patience within us. We need to ask God to develop this enduring faith within us, to develop this long-term faith within us. Because without this patience, without this enduring faith, we will never reach the life that God has called us to live. We will never reach the destiny that God has for us. That's what patience does. Patience produces success. Patience produces fruit. And patience produces results. And so in conclusion, if we want to reach the life that God has called us to live, if we want to reach the destiny that God has for us, we need to have patience. We need to have the patience to endure through trials. We need to be able to endure through difficulties. We need to be able to keep the faith even when we don't see results. Because if we have this patience, then as James chapter 1 verse 4 says, we will be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And if we are perfect and complete, lacking nothing, then we will reach the outcome. We will reach the goal that we've been praying for. So how do we develop the patience to endure through the trials? By staying connected to a community like this, where we encourage one another and learn the deep things of God, where the deep things of God are not reserved for a select few, but for everyone. And so subscribe to this channel to join us in this journey. I hope you guys were blessed and see you guys next time.